Transmission fluid gets old. I typically do mine at least every 60,000 miles. You want to change that fluid out. What happens in the trans is the fluid, especially in the Malibu, I'm going to do it to 6T40. The fluid gets picked up by the filter, flows through the first pressure regulator valve. From that valve, it goes to the torque controller control valve, goes through the torque converter, exits the torque converter, goes through the transmission cooler in the radiator, and then it returns back to the transmission into the lubrication circuit. The reason why you want to change it when it gets old is because the fluid will lose viscosity. Unlike engine oil, where it gets getting gunked up and built up with byproducts of combustion, transmission fluid doesn't get all dirty and thicken up. The fluid loses viscosity because of the shear forces from all the time it's been exposed to spinning gears and being compressed and stretched, the molecules break down. The problem is when you lose viscosity, one, you lose your film strength for protection inside the transmission. So your bearings will wear faster, it'll fail sooner. The second thing is you'll notice almost immediately after getting a proper transmission flush that replaces all the fluid in the torque converter and in the trans pan, you will also have a quicker shift because your clutch fill times will go down. What happens is the pistons for your clutches inside the automatic transmission, they will also have a leakage rate, and a thinner fluid will go past your seals, causing your clutch fill times to go up. So when you put a new fluid in with higher viscosity, your clutches will fill quicker with fluid, and that's why you're getting a quicker, firmer shift after you replace old fluid with new fluid. So it reduces the amount of time that your clutch will slip so that you get longer clutch life too. You can see here, this is the last transmission that I flushed, getting the old fluid out. This is just a cylinder here, and there's a piston with seals separating new fluid from old fluid. What happens is I'll tap into the transmission cooler circuit, and the old fluid will go to the bottom, and then the new fluid that's going to go back into the transmission lubrication circuit will come from the top and then out the red hose into the transmission. This way, the new fluid will get sucked up, put into the torque converter, and then it flows through the trans and the old fluid gets put into the bottom. This way I'm getting almost 100% fluid replacement. T-Tech is one of the best machines, which is why I bought one. So I load up the machine with 10 quarts of fluid. I'm going to get my car in here and we're going to hook it up and we're going to flush it out. The one thing I did forget to mention earlier was a lot of times people will get torque converter shudder, especially in Hondas and Acuras. I see a lot of it. So what I do is I flush the fluid out and all the additives get replenished, and then the transmission starts operating perfectly fine. Sometimes you'll get a shudder at 45 miles an hour near lockup. Sometimes, like I've seen on Subarus, you'll get a shudder right off the line too. This machine, using the proper fluid for the vehicle, will make pretty much all torque converter shudders that I've seen go away. As you can see, I'm hooked up now from the transmission cooler, hooked up to the machine. So what's going to happen here is you can see already, this hose has the new clean fluid going to the transmission lube circuit. This hose has the old fluid, as you can see how it's darker. That's the one coming from the torque converter. Try to put these next to each other. So the fluid in here right now, if I'm not mistaken, has about 60,000 miles on it. So the new is going into the transmission. The new is what's coming out of or the old, this darker one, is what's coming out of the transmission from the torque converter. And when we're done flushing, the hopes are both these lines are going to be just as red and clear as this one down here. You can even see back there, there's a better, more contrast. So now that I have the vehicle running, I'm going to shift it from reverse to neutral to try to exercise as many hydraulic circuits as I can, because I obviously can't drive it around. And then when that piston gets up to the top, I'm then going to turn it off, disconnect it, and hopefully those two lines coming from the transmission will be nice and clean. Getting closer to being done. Now you can see both the transmission fluid lines, the one from the transmission and going back to the loop circuit in the transmission from the cooler, are both nice and clean. That's the signs of a very healthy transmission. So every 60,000 miles, this is a great service to do to extend the life of your transmission. As you can see with this one, the fluid level plug is on the side. I believe they want this car to be in park and running, and the fluid to be around 80 to 100 degrees if I recall, before you try to top it off to set your level. So another thing I want to tell you that I do, that's another trick that I have. See how I got the floor jack? What I did was I lifted the vehicle a little bit, just enough to bias the fluid away from the fill hole. The reason why I'm doing this is that fluid level in the transmission is not an exact science like 2 + 2 = 4. What happens is they try to design the vehicle for a certain level of grade and then make sure that the pump doesn't get starved. So in my situation, I'll drive through buildings downtown Chicago that have these spiral staircase parking garages that have super duper steep angles to climb. So or if you're a guy with like a boat doing really steep boat ramps, what you want to do is you want your fluid level just to be a little bit higher to give you that extra overhead so you don't starve your transmission pump when you're going up those ramps. So that's why I use a jack, just to lift it up maybe about an inch or two, and then bias the fluid away, then set my level. You see that word tested right there? And then down here you see that sticker that says GM parts, GM powertrain. That's because this is a reman transmission. This is the third transmission that's been in this vehicle. Back when I worked at the OEMs, when a vehicle fails under warranty, the transmission gets sent back to the plant that manufactured it, because they might have multiple plants. And an engineer has to tear it down and then evaluate why that transmission failed to grant or approve the warranty. So I had to do that for 3 months, granting and approving warranties. 99% of the time, I would always approve it because I could never prove that the part was defective or whether or not the person that bought the vehicle did something, because a failed broken part early on goes into the infant mortality bag. So there is 1% at a time, and I had one transmission that came back to the OEM, and when I tore it open, the torque converter, I can't believe, didn't explode because it completely changed color of the metals because it got so hot. And then when I looked at the fluid, it looked like Pepto-Bismol because there was excessive water in the transmission. So what I did was I took that fluid and I centrifuged it to separate the oil from the water, and then I checked for the pH level of the water that was in the transmission fluid, because it could be possible that the washers, before these transmissions shipped to the vehicle plant, maybe there wasn't a cap or plug where the axle goes when it went through the water to clean off any excessive oil from the end-of-line test machine. So anyhow, this one here, the pH level matched typical tap water, any water you would find. Maybe the vehicle was in a flood, I don't know. But that was the one, sorry dude, you're the one guy that I denied your transmission warranty on. This one here failed at 98,000 miles. Now, when I went and looked at it when it was torn open, the 3.5R wave plate, the infamous 3.5R wave plate, was broken, and then it basically trailed into a planetary gear set and then shattered pieces throughout the inside of the transmission. I didn't have the time to deal with it and changing it and locating one, because apparently transmission reman places are becoming harder and harder to find. So I just took it to a place and they creamed me pretty hard, harder than I thought. So that's why I decided no more of this stuff. I'm going to go buy a 2-post lift. If my transmission fails again, I'll just rebuild it. So anyhow, this trans shop bought this transmission from the dealer, marked it up even more, and then put it in my vehicle. And yeah, you can understand how that went. So what happened was the new transmission failed about 3 days later for the second famous problem with these, because a valve stuck. So I was on the highway. When I was getting off, the transmission went to downshift and then it got stuck in 5th gear. So now I'm doing full throttle, doing 20 miles an hour because I'm trying to burn out the 5th gear clutch to get to where I'm going, because the lower gears have a higher torque capacity. Eventually I got to where I was going, I parked it, called up the trans shop, they towed it, verified that the new reman transmission was shot, and then they said, you know what, I'm just not gonna work on this thing because it's warranty work. I bought that trans from the dealer, so they took my car and then they towed it over to the dealer, the Chevy dealer, because they would warranty the labor and the transmission rebuild again. So time and time went on. GM dealer that sat there for over a week without it being touched, I eventually showed up and started saying, I'm going to start suing people because I will get a flatbed here and I will drag my property onto the flatbed. I will take it home and I will put the transmission in myself, and then I'm going to sue everyone involved in this because it's my time and money not having a running car, and you people just sat on this thing because it wasn't money making work. Next day I got my vehicle back, and it's been running fine ever since. So I have about, so roughly 70,000 miles on this transmission that got remanned at the actual GM dealer down the street. And I would also let you know, GM doesn't do reman on transmissions. It gets outsourced to a third-party company that has to reman them and test them to GM standards and specs, which is why there's a stamp there that says tested, plus a sticker that says GM powertrain. It is a reman transmission by an authorized GM reman company that is actually located in the same state that I'm living in.